Hello and welcome back. So, the children had just climbed up towards the top of the faraway tree and found some clouds. Chapter 5. The Roundabout Land. One big broad branch slanted upwards at the top of the faraway tree. Joe looked onto it and looked down, but he could see nothing, for a white mist swirled around and about. Above him, the enormous thick white cloud stretched, with a purple hole in it, through which the topmost branch of the faraway disappeared. The children felt tremendously excited. At last they were at the very top. Joe carefully pulled himself up the last branch. He disappeared into the purple hole. Bessie and Fanny followed him. The branch came to an end, and a little ladder ran through the cloud. Up the children went, and before they knew what had happened, there they were out in the sunshine in a new and very strange land. They stood on green grass. Above them was a blue sky. A tune was playing somewhere, going on and on and on. "It's the sort of tune a roundabout plays, Joe," said Bessie, "isn't it?" It was, and then, suddenly, without any warning at all, the whole land began to swing round. The children almost fell over, so suddenly did the swing round begin. "What's happening?" said Bessie, frightened. The children felt terribly giddy, for trees, distant houses, hills and bushes began to move round. They too felt themselves moving, for the grass was going round as well. They looked for the hole in the cloud, but it had disappeared. "The whole land is going round and round like a roundabout," cried Joe, shutting his eyes with giddiness. "We've passed over the hole in the clouds. We don't know where the topmost branch of the faraway tree is now. It's somewhere beneath this land, but goodness knows where." "Joe, but how can we get back home again?" cried Fanny in a fright. "We'll have to ask someone for help," said Joe. The three began to walk away from the patch of green field in which they were standing. Bessie noticed that they had been standing on a ring of grass that seemed darker than the grass around. She wondered why it was, but she had no time to say anything, for really it was dreadfully difficult to walk properly in a land that was going round and round like a proper roundabout all the time. The music went on and on too. Hurdy-gurdy, hurdy-gurdy. Joe wondered where it came from, and where the machinery was that worked the strange roundabout land. Soon they met a tall man singing loudly from a book. Joe stopped him, but he went on singing. It was annoying. "Hi-diddle-ho-diddle, derry-derry-down," shouted the man, whilst Joe tried to make himself heard. "How can we get away from this land?" Joe shouted. "Don't interrupt me. Hi-diddle-ho-diddle," sang the man, and he beat time with his finger. Joe caught hold of the bony finger and shouted again, "Which is the way out of this land, and what land is it?" "Now you've made me lose my time," said the tall man crossly. "I shall have to begin my song again." "What is this land, please?" asked Fanny. "It's Roundabout Land," said the tall man. "I should have thought anyone would have guessed that. You can't get away from it. It goes round and round always, and only stops once in a blue moon." "There must have been a blue moon when we climbed into it," groaned Joe. "It had certainly stopped then." The man went off, singing loudly, "Hi-diddle-ho-diddle, derry-derry-down." "Silly old diddle-derry," said Fanny. "Really, we do seem to meet the most peculiar people." "What I'm worried about is getting home," said Bessie. "Mother will be anxious if we are not back when she is. What shall we do, Joe?" "Let's sit down under this tree and have a bit more to eat," said Joe. So they sat down and munched solemnly, hearing the roundabout music going on all the time and watching the distant hills and trees swinging round against the sky. It was all very strange. Presently a pair of rabbits lolloped up and looked at the children. Fanny loved animals, and she threw a bit of cake to them. To her surprise, one of the rabbits picked up the cake in its paw and nibbled it like a monkey. "Thanks," said the rabbit. "It's a change from grass. Where do you come from? We haven't seen you before, and we thought we knew everyone here. Nobody new ever comes to Roundabout Land." "And nobody ever gets away," said the other rabbit, smiling at Fanny and holding out its paw for a bit of cake too. "Really?" said Bessie in alarm. "Well, We are new to it, for we only came up about an hour ago. We came up the faraway tree." "What?" cried both rabbits at once, flipping up their long ears in amazement. "Up the faraway tree, did you say? Goodness, you don't mean to say that's touching this land?" "Yes, it is," said Bessie. "But I expect, as this land is swinging round and round, that the topmost branch might be almost anywhere underneath it. There's no way of finding out." "Oh, yes, there is," said the first rabbit excitedly. "If we burrow down a little way and make a hole, we can see whereabouts the faraway tree is underneath, and we can wait for it to come round again when the land swings above it." "Well, we came up from the tree just where the grass was rather darker than the rest," said Bessie. "I noticed that. Do you suppose that as the roundabout land swings round, it will come back to the same place again, and we could slip down the topmost branch?" "Of course," said the rabbits. "We can easily burrow down that green patch of grass and wait for the land to turn round just over the tree again. Come on, quickly, there's no time to lose." All of them jumped up and sped off. Bessie knew the way, and so did the rabbits. Soon they were back in the field where the ring of dark grass stood. There was no opening now leading through the cloud down to the tree. It had gone. The rabbits began to dig quickly. Soon they found the ladder that led upwards. Then they made such a big hole that the children could see down it to a large white cloud that swirled below the roundabout land. "Nothing there yet," said the first rabbit, getting out a handkerchief and wiping his dirty front paws. "We must wait a bit. I only hope the land hasn't swung on and passed the faraway tree altogether." The roundabout music went on, and then suddenly it began to slow down. One of the rabbits peered out of the hole below and gave a shout. "The land has stopped going round, and the faraway tree is just nearby, but we can't reach it." The children peered through the cloud below the ladder and saw quite clearly that the faraway tree was very near, but not near enough to jump on. Whatever were they going to do? "Now don't try to jump," warned the rabbits, "or you'll fall right through the cloud." "But what shall we do?" asked Bessie in despair. "We must get on the tree before we swing away again." "I've got a rope," said one of the rabbits suddenly, and he put his hand into a big pocket and pulled out a yellow rope. He made a loop in one end and then threw it carefully at the topmost branch of the nearby tree. It caught and held. Good. "Fanny, slip down the rope first," said Joe. "I'll hold this end." So Fanny, rather afraid, slid down the yellow rope to the tree, and then just as she got there, the roundabout music began to play very loudly and quickly, and the roundabout land began to move. "Quick, quick," shouted Fanny as the land swung nearer to the faraway tree. "Jump, jump!" They jumped, and the rabbits jumped after them. The roundabout land swung off. The big white cloud covered everything. The children and the rabbits clung to the topmost branch and looked at one another. "We look like monkeys on a stick," said Joe, and they all began to giggle. "My goodness, what an adventure! I vote we don't come up here again." But, as you may guess, they did. Chapter 6. Moonface and the Slippery Slip. The children clung to the top branches of the faraway tree, whilst the rabbits slid down a bit lower. They could still hear the gay music of the roundabout land as it swung round overhead. "We'd better get home," said Joe in rather a quiet voice. "It's been just a bit too exciting." "Come on then," said Bessie, beginning to climb down. It will be easier to get down than it was to climb up. But Fanny was very tired. She began to cry as she clung to her branch. She was the youngest and not so strong as Joe and Bessie. "I shall fall," she wept. "I know I shall fall." Joe and Bessie looked at one another in alarm. This would never do. There was such a long way to fall. "Fanny dear, you simply must try," said Joe gently. "We've got to get home safely." But Fanny clung to her branch and wept great tears. The two rabbits looked at her, most upset. One put his paw into her hand. "I'll help you," he said. But Fanny wouldn't be helped. She was tired out and afraid of everything now. She wept so loudly that two birds nearly flew off in fright. Just as the others were really in despair, a small door flew open in the trunk of the tree not far below, and a round moon-like face looked out. "Hey there! What's the matter?" shouted the moon-faced person. "A fellow can't get any sleep at all with that awful noise going on." Fanny stopped crying and looked at Moonface in surprise. "I'm crying because I'm frightened of climbing down the tree," she said. "I'm sorry I woke you up." Moonface beamed at her. "Have you got any toffee?" he asked. "Toffee?" said everyone in surprise. "What do you want toffee for?" "To eat, of course," said Moonface. "I just thought if you had any toffee to give me, I'd let you slide down my slippery slip. You get down to the bottom very quickly that way, you know." "A slide all the way down the faraway tree?" cried Joe, hardly believing his ears. "Good gracious, whoever would have thought of that?" "I thought of it," said Moonface, beaming again just like a full moon. "I let people use it if they pay me toffee." "Oh," said the three children, and looked at one another in dismay, for none of them had any toffee. Then Joe shook his head. "We've no toffee," he said, "but I've a bar of chocolate, a bit squishy, but quite nice." "Won't do," said Moonface. "I don't like chocolate." "What about the rabbits? Haven't they got any toffee either?" The rabbits turned out their pockets. They had a very curious collection of things, but no toffee. "Sorry," said Moonface, and slammed his door shut. Fanny began to cry again. Joe climbed down to the door and banged on it. "Hi, old Moonface," he shouted. "I'll bring you some lovely homemade toffee next time I'm up the tree, if you'll let us use your slippery slip." The door flew open again, and Moonface beamed out. "Why didn't you say so before?" he asked. "Come in." One by one, the rabbits and the children climbed down to the door and went in. Moonface's house in the tree was very peculiar. It was one round room, and in the middle of it was the beginning of the slippery slip that ran down the whole trunk of the tree, winding round and round like a spiral staircase. Round the top of the slide was a curved bed, a curved table, and two curved chairs, made to fit the roundness of the tree trunk. The children were astonished and wished they had time to stay for a while, but Moonface pushed them towards the slide. "You want a cushion each," he said. "Hi, you, rabbit, take the top one and go first." One of the rabbits took an orange cushion and set it at the top of the slide. He sat down on it, looking a little nervous. "Go on, hurry up," said Moonface. "You don't want to stay all night, do you?" He gave the rabbit a hard push, and the rabbit slid down the slippery slip at a tremendous pace, his whiskers and ears blown backwards. Joe thought it looked a lovely thing to do. He went next. He took a blue cushion, sat on it at the top of the slide, and pushed off. Down he went on his cushion, his hair streaming backwards. Round and round and round went the slippery slip inside the enormous trunk of the old tree. It was quite dark and silent, and lasted a very long time, for the faraway tree was tremendously tall. Joe enjoyed every second. When he came to the bottom, his feet touched a sort of trapdoor in the trunk at the foot, and the trap flew open. Joe shot out and landed on a big tuft of green moss, which was grown there to make a soft landing place. He sat there, out of breath. Then he got up quickly, for he didn't want Bessie or Fanny landing on top of him. Bessie went next. She flew down on a fat pink cushion, gasping for breath, for she went so fast. Then Fanny went on a green cushion, and then the other rabbit. One by one, they shot out of the strange little trapdoor, which closed itself tightly as soon as the slider had gone through. They all sat on the ground, getting their breath and laughing, for it really was funny to shoot down inside a tree on a cushion. The rabbits stood up first. "We'd better be going," they said. "So pleased to have met you." They disappeared down the nearest burrow, and the children waved goodbye. Then Joe stood up. "Come on," he said. "We really must get home. Goodness knows what the time is." "Oh, what a lovely way of getting down the faraway tree that was," said Bessie, jumping to her feet. "It was so quick." I loved it, said Fanny. I'd like to climb the tree every single day just so that I could slide down that glorious slippery slip. I say, what do we do with the cushions? At that moment, a red squirrel, dressed in an old jersey, came out of a hole in the trunk. Cushions, please, he said. The children gathered them up and handed them to the squirrel one by one. They were getting quite used to hearing animals talk to them now. Are you going to carry all these cushions up the tree to Moonface? Asked Fanny in wonder. The squirrel laughed. Of course not, he said. Moonface lets down a rope for them. Look, here it comes. A rope came sliding down between the branches. The squirrel caught the end of it and tied the bundle of cushions firmly onto the rope. He gave 3 tugs, and the rope swung upwards again, taking the cushions with it. Good idea, said Joe. And then they all turned to go home, thinking, as they walked, of the strange and exciting things that had happened that day. They came to the ditch and jumped across. They went down the lane and through their little back gate. By the time they reached the cottage, they were ready to drop with tiredness. Their mother and father were not yet home. Bessie sleepily made some bread and milk. They undressed whilst the milk was heating, and then ate their supper, sitting in their beds. I'm not going up the faraway tree again, said Fanny, lying down. Well, I am, said Joe. Don't forget, we promised old Moonface some homemade toffee. We can climb up to his house, give him the toffee, and slide down that slippery slip again. We don't need to go into any land at the top of the tree. But Bessie and Fanny were fast asleep, and very soon Joe was too, dreaming of the strange faraway tree and and the curious folk who lived in its enormous trunk. Hope you enjoyed that. See you again. Bye-bye.